Hello, thank you for joining us this evening for the 2023 Sondheim Art Prize Finalists Artist Talks. My name is Earl Martin, and I am the Deborah and Philip English Curator of Decorative Arts, Design, and Material Culture here at the Walters Art Museum, and will be moderating tonight's conversation. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to read the Walters Land Acknowledgement. The Walters Art Museum acknowledges the Piscataway and Susquehannock nations that originally inhabited this land. We also acknowledge tribal nations, most notably the Lumbee, who migrated here, and indigenous peoples whose ancestors are represented in the objects we steward in our collection. So welcome again to tonight's program, where we will hear from and learn more about the work of the three finalists for the 18th annual Janet and Walter Sondheim Art Prize. The finalists' work is featured in an exhibition at the Walters on view now through September 3rd, 2023. The Janet and Walter Sondheim Art Prize, which awards a $30,000 fellowship to assist in furthering the career of a visual artist or visual artist collaborators living and working in the greater Baltimore region, is administered by the Baltimore Office of Promotion and the Arts and presented by M&T Bank with the generous support of the Maryland State Arts Council. The exhibition at the Walters is made possible through the combined generosity of individual donors, foundations, corporations, and grants from the City of Baltimore, Maryland State Arts Council, citizens of Baltimore County, and Howard County Government and Howard County Arts Council. Tonight, we will hear from all three finalists, Kyrae Dawaun, Nekisha Durrett, and Abigail Lucien. They will discuss their work, including those pieces on view at the Walters, their processes, their artistic practice, and their aims more generally. We hope this program will inspire you to stop by the museum to see their work in person if you haven't done so already. The first artist to speak tonight will be Kyrae Dawaun. Based in Baltimore, Dawaun works in a variety of media and maintains a practice centering on the human dependence on inorganic matter and non-human existence, and explores these geological transactions as they implicate human relationships.
His approach to his work is influenced by his avid studies, speculation, and experience around architecture, hospitality, and the fluid and fickle nature of language. So welcome, Kyrae, and I will let you take over. Tell us more about your work.
Thank you. So I'll just jump in now. This here will be a prelude to the exhibition that I've kind of put together, a small body of work at the Walters. Here, I'll just be showing a few works of my own that might illustrate or demonstrate how I put things together to sort of welcome you into this space as thinkers of your own. Here, the Lymph Edifice really is a ode to that sort of original thinking of my own, where perhaps the intersections between learning about Alice Walker and feminism and Haida Gotna Abendross and this sort of international scope of matriarchal scholarship has inspired me to this day. So a really central sort of background for me, and here, what you have is maybe reminiscent to some as an ironing board, and maybe there's a sort of false phallus, failing even, on the edge of failure. And so a lot of my practice is curious about what better opportunities there are beyond a sort of male domineering governance globally. Next slide, please. I think we may have skipped a slide. And so it's always important for me to sort of question this idea of liberty. This idea of liberty may have some sort of assumptions built into it that isn't actually serving everyone as a collective or as fellows or neighbors to one another. On the contrary, I like to make sure that indeed I do sort of open up my door. I sort of like to be inspired by what was demonstrated to me by the house of women that I grew up in, this sort of confident flow of a welcome. Surely the confidence is where that security is supposed to be sort of found. And this is maybe where I like to introduce to us all. So me, myself as a learner, but you all experiencing some of the raw materials that I offer in my sculptural work. I try to bring us closer to the earth. And so paint matter usually comes from either a mineral or organic space, organic being living matter. So to nestle these things into the built environment, which is also encapsulating us, containing our lived experiences, perhaps this is a stage in which you feel like you're able to come closer to your own thoughts. Next slide, please. So the stage is open. Plenty of paint in different forms. So not just as an oil painting, but sometimes limestone, sometimes casted pigment, but also these moments of interior architectural space are props, and will relate to what I also take on as genre painting to really focus on a decentralizing of a painting practice. Next slide, please. So you will see a lot of figurative work in my in my practice, often an ode to a pop cultural history. And this is a space where I sort of admit who I am as your host. Next slide. And sometimes these sort of popular cues may embody or host conversations that my neighbor that does understand where this reference is coming from can go further into. But in any case, these moments are really supposed to stand in for um, characters that sort of contribute to a larger dance by the sort of orchestrated environment put together here. So these are three paintings that are hosted at the exhibition at the Walters currently. You do have Lawrence Fishburne maybe as Dap or maybe as Maurice Phibbs, but indeed an instructor, a teacher. You have an excellent orator that we know, a sort of Maryland native, if you will, if he could be a native. This is Frederick Douglass, and I try to put him in the Corinthian Hall, perhaps, where he gave his 4th of July speech, or maybe model this after what could be a wax modeled likeness of Karl Marx, somebody who's supposed to represent often a perverted idea about it, but what socialism can be. And here we'll just use socialism, we'll just define socialism as the sort of intent to sort of take care of us all and our social well-being and welfares. Next slide. So come on in and you pass a plant, a moment of solace, something where as though you're not expected to sort of know too much. You can have a moment of being, perhaps, but this sort of still life does also engage that sort of architectural environment, giving you this sort of closeness to the ledge of a window, maybe prompts you similarly to the ways that perhaps that countertop had before. Next slide. The chicken walking out of a sort of constructed environment. Perhaps also in the exhibition, I gave you an idea of where the chicken may have come from, because maybe the chicken is a contradiction to some of the other conversations that I'm having in this exhibition. Whereas though maybe if I'm skeptical of liberty and want to sort of champion what would be a better demonstration of social care for our people at large globally in different governments, the way we sort of take care of our food, for example, is a easy conversation to get to. We can do the next slide. And so I often host sitters when I do my paintings, because as I'm decentralizing this practice, it's also about how I'm operating in the studio. And so me having the opportunity to work with others and sort of actually be present as I'm hoping for my audience is very important and immediate. And so in that case, maybe we'll have to skip that live feed, but I was able to rely on a live feed of where there's many of birds, chickens living, where there's a community developing around someone's backyard chicken coop. Um, Here we have some work that's currently at the Krieger. Speaking of governance, as you're sort of lured into this space by the prospect of looking out and having your own moment of introspection beyond the trees, you're sort of received by a limestone color field of a copper derivative, which ends up being a light blue. So maybe it feels like a river, maybe it feels like a refraction of the sky. And you arrive, next slide, at a concrete structure that has this sort of trifurcated, if that could be a word for the moment, copper piece, something that's very conducive. Um, and so what can happen, what happens between our small communities as we sort of project how we want to be represented and hope to be represented, and then we rely on our government to receive us and take care of us. So there's this disparity there often. And so that's something that I just want us to be able to question and be present with. Often, next slide. The points of the work is to sort of inspire or to celebrate the agency that nonetheless we should fight for, to have for ourselves and our neighbors. Here are just some points of inspiration for the show. It's a great read to read into the oration that he delivered for Frederick Douglass, that is, for the July 4th speech at Corinthian Hall in Rochester, New York. Narcissus, kind of close to that sort of idea of liberty, perhaps. You'll find a polished red limestone floor in the gallery, and that reflection looking into oneself, into the red, the red scare, that sort of immediate antagonizing of what the other is doing. And unfortunately, it seems as though our government to this day persists at defining how we are as a people by how we do not want to be like the other. And I think this tremendously gross. And so that's why the exhibition or group of works that I'm offering, this sort of play on ideas, is called The Red Fair. Next slide. Um, I'll stop here. Time goes, and I'm sure I can say tons more, but here's a painting of St. Francis. Close to the ground, there's a painting of jungle fowl in the exhibition, also close to the ground. A moment where we also can feel like we can be close to the ground. And again, to the right, we have a moment of maybe it's a praying hand, but now maybe it's kind of like a jewel, something that we can wear ourselves. So the moment where the painting isn't just trying to sort of exclaim about the magic of painting, but is also trying to demonstrate how we can be in these sort of small quotidian gestures that I make in some of these genre paintings. So hopefully I left a lot of space in there for you all to ask some riveting questions later. And I'll put my thoughts back together and we'll clarify some things. Thank you. And I hope you get to see the show soon.
Thanks, Kyrae, for taking on us on a journey through some of your work and the way you get there. That was great. Our second finalist tonight is Nekisha Durrett. From vast freestanding sculpture to intimate gallery installation, Nekisha Durrett's work leverages unexpected materials to make visible the historical connections and connotations that places and materials embody, but are overlooked in our day-to-day lives. Whether reimagining pre-colonial landscapes, bygone Black communities, or family lore, Durrett's research-driven practice strives to carve out contemplative spaces and offer opportunities for viewers to consider what is revealed or concealed when information is filtered across time. A native of Washington, D.C., where her studio is based, Durrett earned her BFA at the Cooper Union in New York and MFA from the University of Michigan School of Art and Design as a Horace H. Rackham Fellow. She is currently the Howard University Social Justice Consortium's Artist in Residence Fellow. Her work is included in numerous private collections and public institutions, including the National Museum of African American History and Culture and the Phillips Collection in DC. And I will leave it to you, Nekisha.
Good evening, everyone. I grew up revering these photographs of my mother and father on their wedding day in a photo album that sat on our coffee table for years. I admired how beautiful they looked, and how beautiful and joyful and happy the attendees of their wedding were. Next image. But the thing that I learned later, and what became even more interesting to me, was what you could not see in these images. This is U Street, and this is what my parents would have viewed on their way to their chapel to get married. This is the aftermath of uprisings in Washington, D.C., following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. They were married only a few days after his assassination. The thing that I think inspired me the most about this juxtaposition of images is that between that image of my parents getting married and this image that you see here is this space between joy and pain and beauty and sorrow. And when I think about the days leading up to my parents' wedding and the considerations that they had to make about whether or not they would actually go through with their wedding, and the fact that they ultimately did, for me, that moment, that decision is filled with a resilience and a resistance that I think kind of flows through my work. Next slide, please. This is another image of a small town in Arlington called Queen City. One thing that you don't see in this photograph, you can sort of see here that there's a dirt road. There are modest homes, perhaps made of wood. If you look even closer, you see that there's a chicken in the road. One of the things that you don't see here is that this is 1941 and in Arlington, Virginia. Despite how the rest of Arlington was developed, this area in Arlington was pretty much frozen in time from the late 1800s. There's no running water, there's no electricity, there's no sewage system. And what you would see in the background, if you were to kind of hover over this community, you would actually see outhouses. So there, around the same time that this photograph was taken in 1941, the War Department was looking across the Potomac River for a site for the War Department's headquarters, which we now know as the Pentagon. Another thing you don't see in this photograph is the 903 Black women, men, and children who occupied this community and had their own churches, their own funeral homes, their own beauty parlors. So in 1941, the War Department destroyed this community for the construction of the Pentagon. Next slide. I was invited by the developers of a new park in Arlington to create an artwork that would address this particular site. Knowing this history about this town in Arlington, this Black community, and how it was destroyed, I knew that one of the best ways to honor this community would be to build another community. And so I set out to find Black ceramicists from around the country to build handmade vessels, 903 of them, to represent each one of these individuals. Next slide. And here are those 17 Black ceramicists here. Most of them are photographed in front of the Queen City sculpture, which is a towering 35-foot tall sculpture that is fabricated of brick, concrete, steel. And when you step inside, next slide, this is actually my installation that is on view at the Walters Museum. And on display is some of the work that was produced by these 17 ceramicists. Next slide. Another closer look. Next slide. And when you look overhead, the intended effect is that you look above and you are surrounded by these representations of those 903 individuals who were so overlooked in 1941. When the War Department looked across the Potomac River, they said, look there, there's nothing there. Let's build there. When in fact, there was a community of 903 individuals who had lived there for over 50 years. Next slide. There was at one time in Arlington, Arlington was just one huge brickyard. So many of the Black men in the community worked in these brickyards. The women in the community, oftentimes they would cook food and bring food to the workers at the brickyard. There was one worker at the brickyard who was very poor, but he had a dream. He and his wife had a dream to have a dream home. And he would look at the homes in Foggy Bottom in Washington, D.C. and admire their architecture. And he would, after, every time he would get a paycheck, he would buy a few bricks at a time, like literally a few bricks, 1, 2, 3 bricks. And over time, he had so many bricks that he was actually able to build their very own dream home in Arlington. I love that story, and so many of the stories are embedded in the brick that makes up this piece. Also, I think that when you encounter this artwork and you look up and you see these 903 vessels, not only is it representing all of those 903 individuals who were displaced so long ago, but it's those 17 ceramicists who built these vessels. And not only is it them, but it is a lineage of craftspeople and who trained these ceramicists and brought them to a place where they actually had the ability to make these vessels. Every fingerprint, every demarcation, every variation in color. These vessels are the color and shape of a drop of water. One of the many resources that these residents did not have access to. Next slide. Another view of the interior. Next slide. This piece couldn't have been sited any better. You can see the tower right there, the 35-foot tall tower, or I call it a vessel, in the park. And off in the distance, next slide, there's actually the Pentagon right in the sight line of the sculpture. Next slide. This is a selection of light boxes containing magnolia leaves, which are inscribed with the names of Black women who have been murdered by police. This is on view right now at the Walters Gallery. This is actually 13 out of 34 leaves that I punctured with the names of Black women in 2020 following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Next slide. Please begin play. Thank you. So in 2020, I was taking walks in the cemetery in my neighborhood. One of the beautiful things about this park is that it's full of witness trees. Some of these trees have been there so long that they actually would have witnessed an attempt on Abraham Lincoln's life. There was a towering magnolia tree there. I noticed that these magnolia leaves were the same color as my skin. So I took those leaves home, researched many names of women who often you don't hear about, who have been murdered by police. And I began to puncture their names into the surfaces of these leaves. In total, there are 35 of these leaves. Next slide. This leaf was created to commemorate Ayanna Jones, who was murdered in 2020 at the age of 2010 in Detroit. Next slide. Eleanor Bumpurs, who was killed in the Bronx at the age of 66. Her landlord called the cops on her because she owed him about $11, and they murdered her. Next slide. India Kager, for me, this one really hits home. She was 27 when she was murdered. And when she was murdered, the police found a sketchbook in her bag. She was a musician and a visual artist, and she actually studied at the high school that I graduated from, Duke Ellington School of the Arts. And here's a shot of the original installation, which contained 30 of those light boxes. The light boxes are made of poplar wood. They're lined with velvet. They almost have the appearance of a small coffin. There you can see a detail there of the velvet, the punctured leaves. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nekisha, for telling us more about some of your recent projects and work. It's wonderful to learn more. The third finalist tonight is Abigail Lucien. Abigail Lucien is a Haitian-American interdisciplinary artist and educator based in Baltimore. Lucien's practice addresses themes of belonging, futurity, myths, and place by considering our relationships to inherited colonial structures and systems of belief or care. Working across sculpture, literature, and time-based media, Lucien's practice is autoethnographic, referencing found objects and familiar surroundings as a way to implicate the body's relationship to material and place, interpreting concepts such as loss, love, and grief as fluid procession rather than a state to reach or become. Past exhibitions include the Sculpture Center, New York, MoMA PS1, Delhi Gallery, New York, Museum of Contemporary Art, Panama, Tawani Contemporary in London, the Frost Art Museum in Miami, Atlanta Contemporary, and the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia. Residences include the Amant Studio and Research Residency in New York, the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, the Genius Geppert Academy of Fine Arts in Poland, the Luminary in St. Louis, Santa Fe Art Institute, Acre in Steuben, Wisconsin, Oxbow School of Art and Artist Residency. And I'll leave it to you, Abigail.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, and thank you, Kyrae and Nekisha, for talking about your work. It's really wonderful to learn more about you all and feel like I'm a little bit in Baltimore at the moment. I'm broadcasting from Skowhegan, Maine, where I'm on a residency, so feels good to be close to home in this moment. So my practice belongs to a third culture terrain, a transnational landscape where contradictions are embraced and code meshing is the norm. As an interdisciplinary artist, the many forms that my work take do not fit in neatly definable boxes, but rather actualize fluidly and in tandem with one another. A sculpture begins as a poem that becomes a performance to later become a print that turns into an object. This work, Pierre Bois, which is featured in the exhibition at the Walters at the moment, is something that I think about in both a geological way, as well as a conversation of ancestral migration. The leaves here have been casted how I shipped them from Fort Lauderdale to Baltimore in iron, wrapped in a bundle and dried out through their journey. In their displacement, they continue a conversation that's parallel to migrants from the Caribbean diaspora, and the royal palm in particular centering itself in the Haitian coat of arms seen on the Republic's flag. Giving them a new life in iron honors the fallen for what they've given to the living, a method of thinking of loss and grief as a procession rather than a resolution, a theme that continues throughout the work that we'll see. I was raised in the States as well as the north coast of Haiti, in the second largest city, Cap-Haïtien. The vernacular of material and structures found in the Caribbean find their way time and time again into my practice through influence of form and myth and color and storytelling. I think of the complications and the beauty and the failures of growing up in a conservative household as a queer, biracial, and bicultural person. From an early age, I became really invested in intersections of belief and faith and myth and how they have the power to change the narratives of people and places around them. I believe in dimensionality and our ability to hold contradictions. The double-ended candle symbolizes together the contradictions of burning at both ends, but being frozen in stillness. Fire makes its way into the work both compositionally and chemically, taking on symbolic roles as destroyer and purifier, alluding also to the process of working with steel, which goes through a softening process to manipulate it into a soft, fluid, and playful forms, a kind of drawing practice that I've taken on for myself. Foi both means twice and soul. So boulet de foi translates to twice a burn or burning soul or burnt twice. Boulet can also refer to an intimate touch. So it can also be read as double kissed or kissing two souls at once. Myth, lore, faith, stories told through tradition. These recycled oil drums on the furthest, I think you're right, maybe, are the ways that I learned about iron trade in the Caribbean growing up, as well as learning different lores and myths of mermaids and sea creatures and animals and loas and spirits. On the very left, or well, whatever, you can see an iron worker in the town of Pion, where my family originates from, working on this really large gate that him and his team had put together the morning of. I'm often attracted to these windows and spaces of architecture that have openings or thresholds. There are these like movements of between spaces of being, indoor, outdoor, life, death, a certain threshold that parallels to the ideas that I'm speaking to in the heart of the work. You can also see below him, there is this heart-like structure, right? The Sankova, a West African symbol that has migrated through the Caribbean, as well as the States, right? The Sankova very much looking like a heart, but also representing actually a swan going towards its back to grab an egg. It's a reference to the idea of knowing your heritage, of looking back to understand your past, to know how to move forward. This brings me to Miss Octavia Estelle Butler, who I think about often and whose work has really influenced me from a young age. In Earth Seeds, the Books of the Living, her character writes, "To survive, know the past, let it touch you, then let the past go." I've always loved science fiction. It's a large influence for me, particularly stories with origins that deal with some sort of dimension of crisis or apocalypse. There's this moment in crisis that you learn character, you learn and you can see humanity for the world that it is. In this piece, we see the Sankova on top of an iron AC cage, which rests on a silk pillow and a bottle of shea butter. Those two Sankovas symbolizing, again, this need to reflect on the past, to be fully present, emphasizes history embedded in colonial architecture and the symbols of life as a cosmogram in Voodoo traditions and rituals. What does it mean for adornment to be on these barred spaces? Is it a message from the residents, the metal worker who bent the bars? Are they trying to display kindness to potential threats? Again, a partition, a veil, a gate, a fence. All of these handmade pieces are impregnated with this impending violence and endured with these symbols of apocalyptic mythos. The words liberté ou la mort can be made out on the steel banner frozen in the stillness by an invisible force. The words reference an important moment in the Caribbean history, the creation of the first flag of the Republic of Haiti. The word apocalypse itself, meaning to unveil, thus to reveal, to disclose. And so we think about the ways our world is revealed through crisis. And I think of the space, again, of science fiction that allows us to imagine a world that is possible due to the limits that we know, right? To be so bound to this reality, our society and culture. So metal as a drawing tool, metal as a geological timekeeper. You can play the video if you'd like. And metal as a material metaphor. This is me working in the foundry that we partnered with in Richmond, Virginia. Metal always as a metaphor and metal as a way to address these unseen systems and hidden forces at play in our day-to-day lives. Here, I'm opening a sand-casted resin mold with this bronze rope with inside of it that's been casted in rebar and then recasted in bronze. Playing upon this lore surrounding tying knots for their purpose to be to call up a recollection, to give it body, to render it active and thereby actual. I enact this gesture of rendering memory permanent through metal. Through these material transformations, these translations, thank you, of these objects, I'm asking for this deeper understanding of places built and lands occupied, as well as implicating the body's relationship to material and place. A material that is often within the work that I'm thinking about a lot is cocoa butter. Cocoa butter is a solid, edible fat extracted from the cocoa bean, the same bean that we use for chocolate. It's rich in antioxidants and renowned for its healing properties. For me, cocoa butter carries a material metaphor of healing and of labor, as well as process, and in particular, the ritualistic labor of self-care. At an early age, I was introduced to cocoa butter as a material for self-healing, right? So I was taught to rub it into my skin to replenish and to disappear a scar, maybe. In this piece, Vision, 15 pounds of cocoa butter stand in a casted baluster as a material for healing ritual. What does it mean to envision building spaces with the softness of something that can melt in your hand? how does this mimic the same instability we see in nations and in communities where infrastructure has been left intentionally fragile and without aid? The last work I'll speak with you about tonight is Holding Your Name Like Butter in Your Palm. It's an installation at the Sculpture Center in New York as a part of In Practice. You may go, but this will bring you back. Another exhibition I had the honor to be showing alongside Kyrae as well. In this work, I wanted to find a way through my practice to speak to a compounding of loss and grief, as well as speak to an unending process of healing. A week, a little less than a week of the murder of George Floyd, I lost my father very suddenly to COVID. And there seemed to be this sort of notion of a quick grief or a quick guilt or some way that you were meant to process this. And so I wanted to think about ways that grief is held in the body perpetually for a process that exists your entire life. So Holding Your Name Like Butter in Your Palm is an installation that pays homage and prospers this kind of healing that is unending, is non-resolving, right? For the personal and the collective trauma caused by death from COVID-19, and also documented and recorded the first year of murders by the hands of police in the first year of the coronavirus pandemic. Catherine Simone Reynolds, a curator of In Practice, You May Go, but this will bring you back. They posed, how can we navigate the unending notions of process and procession through a softer lens? What would it look like for us to move not toward resolution, but towards a constant, comfortably unresolved state? What if there is no such thing as closure? This work's essence is meant to be reflective and restorative, making a statement of the importance of valuing Black life within and outside of the context of an art institution. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Abigail, for walking us through and telling us more about your practice and your work. That brings us to the end of the presentations, and now we'll have all the artists join us on screen, and we're going to dive into the question and answer portion of tonight's program. I have a few questions just to start things off, but if you're joining us live, I encourage you to submit your questions in the chat on Facebook or YouTube. We are talking to the three finalists for the Sondheim Prize for Baltimore area artists, and I guess I would like to know, each of you is working in Baltimore or Washington, or well, maybe not right now, but generally, and has living or working in this region or Baltimore influenced your artistic practice and the works you've produced over maybe the last few years? Could you maybe discuss that a bit if it's something that resonates?
I was in DC before I was in Baltimore. And so it's interesting to sort of recognize the sort of political environment that even belongs to beyond the political work or the government worker. Beyond the government work is kind of very common to have this sort of conversation about what is going on as far as the mechanisms of government is concerned there. So that being such a sort of commonplace conversation there, I think is something that I can appreciate, to honor the question. Living in Baltimore, I came here during COVID. And so even before then, I had a history in Baltimore. So to sort of have this sort of perspective, return to this perspective in such a city that has to demonstrate some sort of resilience in the challenges that it faces socially. I think is also a real reality to live with, as far as considering one's existence as a citizen in a space, and how one is taken care of, and and one's capacity to do so for themselves. Um, yeah, those are two dynamics that come to mind immediately.
Kyrae, I'm so glad you brought up government workers. I come from a long line of government workers, being a native to the DC area, and I think that being in a town that is anchored in government, artists are obviously kind of on the outside of that, which I think makes for us having a very kind of small, kind of close knit kind of community, and I think that they're in that has spawned a community of artists who are very interested in supporting one another. When I think about my latest work and what really works so well about the work, it's that at the center of it is community. And I'm not certain if I lived in DC, if I did not live in DC, that would have happened. That seed would have been planted in that way. So I feel I feel that this region is a really special place that kind of has community at the heart of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I come from a different experience where I've been moving throughout the U.S. over the last kind of ever. Living 3 years in, I was in Haiti, and then Florida, and then Tennessee, and then Virginia, and then and that's how I've gotten to Baltimore. And so there is something really sort of interesting about crawling up the East Coast and seeing the different ways that regionality plays in both artist creation, but also in community creation, as what like Nekisha was just talking about. And I think in my time in Baltimore, I feel like one of the most sort of reflective moments that I've had is that there is something that there's something about Baltimore that doesn't ask to be itself. And I love that. There's a sort of affirmation of character and doing what you do. And just in walking the streets, it feels that's the mood, that's the energy. And I think that is a phenomenal thing to be walking into the studio with, to be authentic to yourself and to learn that and see that reflected in the space that you live in.
Thanks for that. I am kind of keeping an eye on our audience questions. So far we have one from Mira Joseph, asking Kyrae about the inspiration behind the tolerance piece, I believe.
That's awesome, Mira. I guess you got to get into the space. Yeah, the term tolerance is it's actually so big, and it's so I had very particular intention there, and I'll get there first. But even showing the work titled Ween Vignette, maybe you will recall the sort of bisected slice of cake, if you will, the sort of bright orange lead piece on the countertop. That one was also thinking about weaning. And that's what that shape is about too, this sort of that sort of So these sculptures take on these abstract shapes to sort of allude to the language that it's embodying. And so anyway, to sort of wean is to sort of be able to sort of endure a transition, to sort of achieve some sort of transition. Anyway, I just thought of that because tolerance has this moment too where there's this idea that we can withstand a certain amount of something. Here in this moment with this tolerance, I think I'm also thinking about um, how far, what's the sort of allowance for something to remain intact and serving the intent that it's supposed to serve. So this work tolerance that's in the exhibition, um, I think is reminiscent of perhaps a radiator, if you will. And the radiator is just to give you all a visual. It generally is going to be this sort of against the wall, um, these sort of rectangular shapes in a line. What happens when those rectangular shapes fall out of line? Even if they sort of start to make a slight turn out of that line, um, is this thing still able to function in the way that it was originally intended? And so, what's the dynamics there? I'm no near here or there as far as sort of making a point about if it's right or wrong. But one might then at that point question themselves as far as what is our tolerance to sort of allow our neighbors to sort of suggest something new, for us to be able to accommodate perhaps a new idea or try something new to sort of see if it will still work. And yeah, so something about that. It's a lot of space there, I think, for us to consider sort of our capacity. And that's a lot of what I'm thinking about these days, at least this immediate summer. And, there's much more I could share about that. So if you had a particular angle in which you were curious about that sort of tolerance work, of course, follow up, Mira. Thanks for the question.
Okay, well, we could maybe try to tackle a bit of another question from our audience. Do you feel your artistic efforts are moving the needle on social progress towards racial equity? So I guess for all of our artists.
I don't know. I mean, I think that what I'm most concerned about, especially as I'm sitting here in New Orleans, I'm traveling through the South, and I'm thinking a lot about the stories that don't get told, those that do get told and are, there is an attempt to conceal those stories, to conceal history, to re-edit history. And I think that what I can put my arms around is doing my very best to illuminate those lesser known stories, because I think that we can't really move toward racial equity until we all are able to acknowledge our past, and also to acknowledge that the past isn't the past. The past is actually right now. I'm just leaving Mississippi on and yesterday was Emmett Till's birthday, and it just so happened that I was in Money, Mississippi on Emmett Till's birthday, and the people in Money, Mississippi they're very divided on what actually happened, which is insane to me. Absolutely insane. And so I think that, yeah, I think that everyone has to acknowledge what has happened. We really have to wrestle with our history, with American history. And yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling here, but because this is all kind of like fresh stuff for me, but um, there has to be some sort of acknowledgement and recognition of these dark parts of our past.
Yeah, totally. I'm sorry, Nekisha. I was just gonna.
No, that's it.
Yeah. I think there is something that is like really important about the way that art can move and also to bring light to these points that Nekisha is making and like unveil, sort of like earth, right? Like unearth some of these pasts that in a way that can be poetic, in a way that can touch people, in a way that is also just highlighting truth, right? Like my students know how hard I ride for Audre Lorde's poetry is not a luxury. Like I really believe in the fact that truth and like that the fact that art can change and that can make change, but and also that art can have this is a necessity, right? It's not only a sort of mode of expression. It's a necessity. It's a survival tactic, right? That's how I feel about making. But to the question of the like specificity of like social practice towards racial equity, I can only answer with like, what is that? You know, like what is equity, right? Like, what do we mean by like where are we sort of moving towards? Because I think that in people's mind, I mean, even in this conversation we've had in our presentations, we've had different ideas of liberty, right? We have different perspectives of societal change or need, and so I think that one will always hold these different ideas of what equality looks like. And I think that that's real. I think that that's necessary too. For equality for someone is to be recognized. Equality for another person is reparations. And equality for another is to see something change inside of their community. And so getting to a space, I think, where we're able to have conversations, getting to a place that maybe we're changing our own ideas of a sort of narrow outlook, I think moves towards a space where, equity can maybe be fantasized and achieved, but there's so much more than just art that has to work within that social dynamic. It's one small part of a larger conversation.
Yeah, definitely think there's such a larger task at hand, beyond the undeniable reality of inequality. Um, you know, the best to do is to tune in, locally, exchange with whatever comes into your path. Um, often that does take sort of a boldness to dare fight for, so you can be and indulge and sort of process and learn. Those are things you also have to fight for. Um, but surely, rather being able to be in oneself with this sort of exchange and develop community, that one is able to perhaps become one that is demonstrating, contributing, and through that space, we, I guess, are on the way to sort of defining or creating what we want to be a part of. And if we don't allow such things as such oppressive definitions and uh, uh, presumptions and things like that to be projected onto us, then then that doesn't need to be the agenda that we're writing. We're sort of writing outside of it and creating outside of it. And hopefully that sort of demonstration ends up being a bit, well, at least active and activating toward, a more egalitarian sort of existence. If that is to serve us all. I mean, I guess by definition, that's what egalitarian means, though. Yeah, it's a huge question, right?
And I do recognize that we're going a bit over, but I think maybe we could try to tackle another question from our audience, maybe 1 minute or less each of you, if you have any advice for emerging artists from Nadia on YouTube.
Oh, man.
Hi, Nadia. I know Nadia. Nadia has been one of my students for years now, and I love them so much. So thank you for asking this question. You already know what I'm going to say, Nadia, but it's to trust yourself. Trust yourself and do it fearlessly. Make sure that you don't even know what you're doing and ask questions later. You'll figure it out. But I think what's important is to move forward in a way that is curious and is authentic to you. So I think when it comes, well, whatever, we can talk later, Nadia. I'll stop it there. 1 minute. Earl said 1 minute, so I'll keep it short.
I think that's excellent advice. I think that oftentimes, I can remember times, looking around and seeing what everyone else is doing and feeling maybe like not trusting myself and thinking that maybe I was on the wrong path when not recognizing that actually that maybe the way that I see the world is actually, is actually, maybe it's a voice that is needed. And I had to absolutely trust myself I think that was actually the perfect advice. Trust yourself. Don't feel like you have to do one thing. If you're a painter, Nadia, I don't know what your medium is, but if you're a painter, don't feel like you only have to make paintings, or if you're a sculptor, that you only have to make sculpture. Move outside of what people tell you is your lane.
Because there's so many lanes, right? And if we actually are sort of driving on some larger road together, then it's okay to be a part of something, and if you're able to be a part of something or can appreciate being a part of something, maybe you can give yourself that time to sort of recognize yourself and appreciate those small questions you have for yourself and those small challenges and conflicts you might have with yourself. Perhaps those conflicts are the things that need more time, and that might allow you plenty things to sort of produce and mull over. And for the record, I've only gone last just to sort of be able to have some more to tune into with these other thinkers leading the way. But yeah, it's we can complement one another, and so if we recognize that we can complement one another, maybe we can recognize that we have more time than we think for ourselves.
Great. Okay, well, one last question. I would like each of you to tell us more about where we can find your work, maybe online or in the real life. Maybe start with you again, Kyrae.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, August 19th, I have a show opening at Hamiltonian Gallery in Washington, D.C. So that's a great time to catch up with me. And, you know, you have the internet things also. Um, and at least my email is also attached on my website. So um, I think that's a sure place to be able to connect beyond social media likewise.
I guess Nekisha's next, if we're going to go in order.
Yeah, there you go. NekishaDurrett.com. Instagram at Nekisha Durrett. What was the other thing I was going to add? Oh, yes. If you want to learn more about Queen City and the commissioned ceramicist, you can learn more at Queen City QueenCityVA.art to learn more. There's more about the history of Queen City, about those ceramicists. You can visit each one of their websites. I encourage you to do that and learn some more about the process and how Queen City was made.
Abigail?
You can see my work at the Walters Art Museum right now. But you can also see it on display in the We Buy Gold 7 exhibition that is in New York, split between Jack Shaman and Nicola Vassal's gallery, as well as later in the fall at Swivel Gallery in Brooklyn and Bard Graduate Center in New York City. And in November, I'll have my first New York solo show at Delhi Gallery in New York. So you can come to all of them or none of them, but I'll be there. The work will be there. So.
Great. Well, I'd like to again send thank you to all our special guests here, Abigail Lucien, Nekisha Durrett, and Kyrae Dawaun. Thank you all for being here. And a big thanks to our digital team for producing this program. And a bigger thank you to you, the audience, for taking the time to be with us. Free access to the Walters Art Museum, both online and in person, is made possible through the combined generosity of individual donors, foundations, corporations, and grants from the City of Baltimore, Maryland State Arts Council, citizens of Baltimore County, and Howard County Government and Howard County Arts Council. This program is co-hosted with the Baltimore Office for Promotion and the Arts and presented in conjunction with the 18th Annual Janet and Walter Sondheim Art Prize Finalist Exhibition on view at the Walters through September 3rd, 2023. We look forward to welcoming you back for more virtual programs for upcoming programming, including artist talks, curatorial lectures, performances, and more. Please visit our website at thewalters.org. If you would like to support the Walters, head to the link thewalters.org/give. Finally, be safe, be well, enjoy the rest of the evening, and hopefully stay cool in the hot of the summer. Thanks a lot.